All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Convergence Healing Podcast. My name is Peter Bedard. I am so thrilled to have you guys here. You know, it is part of my life purpose to share healing possibilities with people, to show and to be an example. You know, I healed myself of all kinds of things that I was told could never be healed. I was told I couldn't walk again, all kinds of issues. And now I actually dance. So I am here to be in a way an example, not to say that I'm so amazing, but to say, hey, if I can do it, so can you. And so I'm here with a wonderful man, Dr. Ben Fuchs. Ben's going to talk to us in just a moment about his own healing journey, where he came from, his own health practice, and a great topic that he has, which is the limitation of health. But before we do that, I want to remind everybody that today's podcast is brought to you as a partnership with the Earthwalk. Earthwalk, as part of their global wholeness clock, Earthwalk's mission is to create a global culture of peace, and we are tending to the moment of joy in this experience right now. To find out more about the Wholeness Clock and its other shows, programs, classes, international workshops, please visit their website at earthwalkunited.org/wholeness clock. So Earthwalk is a great organization. I'm encouraging you guys all to go there, get some resources. A lot of it's free, and it's a wonderful community to be part of. So Ben, hi.
Hi, Peter. So nice to be with you.
Thank you. I am thrilled to have you on the show. You were kind enough to have me as a guest on your show, and it was just like talking to the mirror.
I felt the same way. I felt the same. When I look at you, you're like a ball of joy. On the phone, I mean, on the radio when we talked, I got that, but now I'm seeing you. You're just a walking ball of joy. Everything about you is joyful. The background, your painting in the background is joyful. Your energy is joyful. How you talk is joyful. Everything about you is joyful.
Well, thank you.
I know you stand for that.
I do stand for that.
Yes.
Absolutely. And it's an important thing because I think joy is an experience that is always present in us, but we have to work at it. We have to cultivate it. We have to allow it to be shining through us, right?
Shining great. It reminds me of like the sun and clouds. The sun's always there, even if it's a cloudy day. The sun is always there behind the clouds, right?
Exactly. God, I love your analogy. That's awesome. You know, joy wasn't an easy thing for me. And it still is something I challenge myself with. You know, I find that a lot of people who've gone through dark experiences, who've gone through traumatic or, painful lives, when we come out of it, it's kind of like a post-traumatic growth. Instead of post-traumatic trauma, right?
Yeah.
It's post-traumatic growth. We actually expand and grow and become more than the trauma.
Yeah.
And you have an interesting story that I really would like to hear. What did you call it? Your boot camp?
Boot camp. You know, when you talk about trauma, post-traumatic growth, it reminds me of the story about the caterpillar. If you or a bird, if you let a bird, birds peck through the egg to get out. The baby bird pecks through the egg. But if you feel sorry for the bird and you take it out of the egg or you break the egg, the bird dies. It's not strong enough. It has to somehow have resistance, the resistance of the egg, and has to fight against the resistance of the egg to be strong enough to fly.
Yeah, I've not heard that with birds. I've definitely heard it with what you said for originally caterpillars, that if they're not squeezing out of their cocoon, it's not it's like squeezing the chemicals through the body so their wings don't develop.
Yeah, exactly. So they need to have that kind of stress or trauma. A tree has to push against the earth in order for it to grow tall. And there's all these metaphors throughout nature that show you that stress is your friend. Stress is a good thing. If you you lift weights, you tear up your muscles, what happens the next day? Your muscles get bigger. In fact, that's thing about the butterflies or the caterpillar is really interesting because the caterpillar turns into a butterfly, right? But before it turns into the butterfly, it gets liquefied.
It dissolves.
There's nothing left. Exactly. It has to completely dissolve. And even better, the cells that are inside this juice, this caterpillar solution, whatever it's called, the cells are called imaginal cells. And the butterfly is created out of the imaginal cells. In biology, they're literally called imaginal cells. It's like the imagination. We have to imagine ourselves a butterfly. We use our ability to visualize. We use this kind of the imagination is not something you can put your hand or your finger on. You can't really handle it. It's an abstract idea, but it's through the imagination, it's through imaging that you turn yourself from a pulverized solution of caterpillar juice into a beautiful, glorious butterfly. And
Absolutely.
I'm sure you had the same experience when you were going through your darkest periods. You must have known that there's something you could be. You must have had your imagination activated, that there was a possibility and that there was a potential. And that's all this, you know how we're suffering the world seems like it's going to hell in a handbasket, right? All our problems are really come from a lack of imagination,
Right.
or at least a weakness in imagination. We're not able to imagine what's next. We're not able to imagine the world ahead, because if we could imagine what was next, if we could imagine the world ahead, we would see this, all the stuff that's going on in the world, as a golden opportunity to become a butterfly.
Absolutely. What
Right?
we can perceive, we can achieve.
Wonderful.
You know, I have friends in so many different spiritual communities, and one of them likes to say, what is it? He says, pray and walk. Pray and walk, right? That's his thing, right?
Yeah.
I'm not a prayer person as much as I'm a meditation person, right?
Okay.
That type of thing. But you know, I so understand that, man. You've got to have that concept, and then you have to have boots on the ground. You have
Boots
to
on
have,
the ground.
right? You got to be implementing.
They're
What
both
you
important.
can perceive, you can achieve.
Yeah, that's the biggest problem people have with the law of attraction sometimes, and why The Secret gets kind of like poo-pooed a little bit, is because you do have to have that imagination. You do have to have the ability to pray and to visualize something ahead, but then you got to take action. The missing link is the action. But if you have both going, if you have the imagination and you have the action, there's so much that's possible for us to do. And so
Absolutely.
I saw that as a child. I saw
Mhm.
that as a child because I had a traumatic childhood, in the sense that I had parents who were not supposed to be parents. I don't know if you can relate to that. They weren't, they're good people deep down, but God love them. They weren't
No
supposed
parenting skills, huh?
Yes, no parenting skills, very poor parenting skills. So I grew up with the sense that there's something wrong with the world, that the world just wasn't right. Because I knew deep down that I didn't know I was a divine being as a kid, but I knew that I was a child, that there's something, I was human. I had just by virtue of my humanity, I deserved respect, and I knew that, and I wasn't being treated that way. And then one day, my mom had these books, and my mom she wasn't a reader, but she liked books. So we always had books. So I picked up a book called Between Parent and Child. Do you ever hear this book? It was a classic book from the 60s about child rearing. And I picked it up and I read it. And I was like 5 years old. I didn't read it really like cover to cover, but I could read, and I read parts of it. And I remember reading the part where they said you talk nicely to your children and you treat your children with respect and you don't beat your children, and all these things. And I was like, my mom never read this book. Oh my God.
Oh,
I remember
man.
yes.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
I know. So, but it taught me that there was this thing called psychology. And it taught me that there was this thing called the mind. And I didn't know it exactly in those terms, but I knew it in a sort of abstract, kind of vague sense, that there was something that we could work on mentally to make us better. And I became obsessed with two things happened from that chance reading of that book. Is number one, I became obsessed with information. I became obsessed with data, and I started reading the encyclopedia. I would spend hours in the library, and I read Newsweek cover to cover, and I just became obsessed with reading and with information. That was number one. And on the other hand, I got pissed off. I was really angry because I knew that I wasn't being treated correctly. I knew that there was a way to treat somebody, and I wasn't being treated as I should be treated. So I became very smart, and I became very angry. And that was not necessarily, as it turns out, it was a good combination, because it made me really want to be better. It made me really want to make the world better. And it also taught me, my childhood taught me empathy, because I learned that only sad people or only hurt people would hurt you. If somebody was hurting you, because I could tell that, because my mom was sad and my mom was hurt, my dad was sad, my dad was hurt. So I knew to spot sadness and I knew to spot hurt. And so I got very wise, I got very psychic, and I got very pissed off. And the three of those together made me a rebel. It made me rebel against the status quo. It made me an outsider. It made me think outside the box. It made me not accept things that I was told. It made me question things. And I found that to be a very, very good skill because I became an outside the box thinker. And in combination with my desire to read and desire to understand how the world was, and in combination with my psychic abilities that I was developing, my empathy, I really became, I became a very sharp and a sharp observer of reality, a sharp observer of humanity, a sharp observer of society. And that skill has suited me incredibly well my whole life. Now, I got to tell you, if I was just angry, I'd probably be in jail right now.
Right.
I'd probably be in prison right now. But somewhere along the lines, I became spiritual. And I knew that there was a higher power. I started to understand that there was something bigger than us. And so I decided to dedicate, it wasn't even a conscious decision, but along the way, I decided I wanted to dedicate myself to this higher power, to this higher spirit. I didn't know what to call it until I had this kind of experience. When I was a kid, I used to like to hitchhike. And I thought it was really cool to hitchhike. This was the 70s. Hitchhiking was really cool, right?
People hitchhiked all the time in the 70s.
Yeah.
It was amazing. It was in the 80s. Right.
You look younger. Were you around the 70s? I don't think you were.
Yeah.
You were?
Thanks, Ben. That's so sweet of you. I appreciate that.
All right, I didn't know that, but so you can relate. Hitchhiking was a big thing.
Yeah.
So I was hitchhiking a lot. One day, for a short period of time, and everybody who picked me up would tell me about Jesus. They'd say, "Oh, you got to talk to Jesus. Have you talked to Jesus?" And I was irrational. I was smart. I was studying. I was a scientist. It didn't make sense to me. Jesus, what is this Jesus? And so it seemed like every time somebody picked me up, they'd ask me about Jesus. They tell me about Jesus. You got to talk to Jesus. Do you know Jesus? Are you saved by Jesus? And I was thinking, what is this craziness about Jesus? And one day somebody picks me up and he goes, "Do you know about Jesus? Have you talked to Jesus?" I'm like, "Please, what is this about Jesus? Everybody who picks me up is telling me about Jesus." So I get out of the guy's car and I go on the bus and I sit on the bus. I was taking the bus it was like a hitchhike bus trip I was taking. Get on the bus, I go on the back of the bus. And I was like, okay, I am going to talk to Jesus. I was like, I don't know. Jesus, if you're there, I'm talking to you. I just felt stupid because I was a scientist and I was rational. And I'm telling you, almost as soon as the words came out of my mouth, Jesus was right there. And he says to me, he says, "I'm with you now. I've always been with you and I will always be with you." Just like that. And boom, I understood what Jesus was about. Jesus is this sense of this thing that I always knew was with me all the time. I didn't know it was Jesus. I never called it Jesus, but it was always the voice in my head that was telling me, turn left, turn right, have the ham sandwich, have the turkey sandwich, talk to this person, don't. That's Jesus. And then I realized that Jesus is this intuition that we have. And then I went to the Bible and I started plugging in the word intuition wherever there's the word Jesus. So it says, "If I be lifted up, I shall lift all men up with me. If intuition be lifted up, I will lift all men up to me. I am the light of the world." If intuition is the light of the world, everywhere it's the same thing. We personify it and we anthropomorphize it.
Oh my God, we have to make it a big fat white guy up in the sky.
We gotta make it all exactly. It's this higher sense, this connection we have to all that is. So when Jesus says, "I am the truth, the light, and the way, no man cometh unto the Father but through me," intuition is the light,
and the way.
And no man cometh unto the Father without intuition. Yeah. Exactly. So I became spiritual, but not in the standard spiritual kind of way. I became to honor this connection that we all have. It's
always there. Absolutely.
It's always there.
Yeah. Now, Jesus for me was I absolutely understand for you. The word Jesus for me was a very charged word because people that said they believed in Jesus were very abusive to me. So I was like, I don't get how this Jesus guy is supposed to be so great and everybody's beating me up. Right. So for me, I had to find, the word God was a very painful word. It was a very punishing word, right? So I had to understand,
Were you raised in a religious kind of background?
Not really a religious background, but there was religion present. My parents weren't really super religious people, but there was definitely a religious overtone to my childhood. And it just never really made sense to me until I started to understand the Christ consciousness. And I started to understand very much like what you were talking about with, for me, instead of intuition, it was being able to, intuition was there sometimes, but it was joy or it was health. and with a capital, like the perfect health, like health in its beingness
Mm.
instead of just
Health
the
and
human
holy,
form.
health and holy come from the same place.
Absolutely, yeah. And wholeness in
And
itself, right?
wholeness,
So
exactly.
I started to discover words that were spiritual equivalents for the
Mm.
word God, right? So for me, joy is a spiritual equivalent for that word, right? And it's present for everyone in
Yeah.
whatever way they want to understand it. If it's through Zoroaster, if it's through Jesus, if it's through Allah or Buddha or whatever it is this consciousness that is always present and always there. And I even went so far because it was such a destructive thing for me. Religion was such a destructive thing for me that I have a master's degree in consciousness studies, which is science and religion, two things
Awesome.
that traditionally would be at odds with each other, right?
That's awesome. How did you get a master? You literally have a master's degree in science and consciousness?
Yeah.
Awesome.
That's my it's
What,
one of those new degrees like
you got to
psychoneuroimmunology,
study
right?
it for, you got to study it for like a degree. That's super cool. Did you have a
Exactly.
thesis?
And
Did you have a
pardon?
thesis? Did you have a specialty, a thesis, like a one particular thing, aspect of it that you studied?
It was really a generalized degree, but I used at the same time I was getting my master's degree, I started to go into hypnosis work and to neurolinguistic programming and medical imagery and
Oh,
stuff of that sort. So my thesis was really about creating a group and challenging old thoughts and behavior patterns through affirmations and mantras and chants
wow.
and understanding how they chemically interact with the body, so understanding that how a thought creates a chemical signature in the body, whether it's a stress thought that creates stress chemicals, or whether it's a healthy, happy, whole thought that creates serotonin, oxytocin,
Yeah, yeah.
things of that sort. So,
It's almost like they're two sides of the same coin. Like a
well,
thought
they
is,
are. They're all
yeah,
happening within the same body.
simultaneous. Yes. Yeah. It's like another way of phrasing the same thing. A thought
Right.
is another way of phrasing a biochemical transformation.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. And understanding that our thoughts are really things.
Yes. Our
You
thoughts
know,
are things, literal
yeah,
things. They can be measured like things. Yeah.
they absolutely, and they can be repeated.
Yeah.
Yes. And they often are repeated in a very negative
In a
way.
negative way by
Mhm.
black magicians.
Yeah,
Right?
right?
They are. The government does it all the time, and the media does. Look at all the disempowering messages that are going on now, repeated over and over and
Right.
over again. It's impossible unless you put on your spiritual armor, your wading boots and your hazmats, your mental hazmat suit. It's impossible not to be affected by all that stuff that's
Right,
going on.
right.
Right?
And I like to look at it when I turn on the news or a friend of mine talks about something that's that's concerning to them or upsetting. I like to say, this is an opportunity for me. So it's an opportunity for me to hold the consciousness of good, of love, of
Yeah.
light. Some people, my Christian friends would say it's the opportunity for them to pray, right? It would be just different ways of looking at things where instead of getting drawn into the pain, which is a big part of my practice, our instead of getting drawn into it, actually learning from it and allowing it to be something that infuses our life. It infuses our life with a sense of wholeness or a sense of wellness. So when we can step away from those things and we can actually implement, part of my practice is actually talking to our pain, right? And I think
Literally,
this is a
literally.
conversation that we need to do both inner on a personal level. It's also a conversation that we need to do on a societal and global level.
Yeah. You literally talk to pain. You mean like literally, like you're saying,
Like
look,
literally, like anthropomorphize or give your
yeah,
pain, part of my process, give your pain a shape and a form. Because
wow.
when we do that, when the brain can see, oh, there's Bob the Blob, right? Now I can relate to Bob the Blob. And it's not just this overwhelming concept
Amorphous.
of fear, judgment,
Yeah.
worry, whatever it is, right? I
Like,
can now see it.
yeah, tangibilizing it. Make,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. That's
Yeah,
beautiful.
so it's part of that process. And, I think that's going to really fit into what you're talking about, what we sort of briefly mentioned prior to our, hitting the record button, right? This limitation of health. Tell me a little bit more
Yeah.
about that concept.
Yeah. Well, I'm a pharmacist and I'm trained in medicine and drugs, if you will. And I got into pharmacy because I was just fascinated with chemistry. I was the kind of kid who had a chemistry set, as a
Mhm.
kid. And I always was blown away by chemistry. And then full disclosure, I got into drugs I got into smoking pot, and I got into doing hallucinogenics. And it was always fascinating to me how just a tiny little bit of a drug could just completely change your perspective. And then I started studying food as medicine. I realized food is the most powerful drug that we ingest on a regular basis. I became just blown away by the idea that there were these little molecules that you could put in your body and that could completely change you. You know, change your perspective, change your biochemistry. And so, and I love chemistry. And so I thought to myself, how can I make money at this? And the first thing how can I make a
That's
living?
awesome.
I know, but unfortunately, I thought of pharmacy for some reason because I heard pharmacists made a lot of money, and I knew that they studied, they studied drugs and they worked with drugs. And my real goal being a pharmacist was I wanted to do food as pharmacy. But by the time I'd gotten into pharmacy school, I realized it was too late, and I realized that nobody talks about food as pharmacy; they just talk about drugs. And and one of the funny things about being in pharmacy school is you spend most of your time studying toxicity, studying the poisonous nature of drugs and how to mitigate the poisonous nature of drugs and how to get your patients to take drugs even though they have side effects, and how to have less side effects. And then on top of that, in pharmacy school, unbeknownst to most people, we study nutrition. But we don't study nutrition as a pharmacist. We study nutrition. I'm sorry, we don't study nutrition like a dietitian. We study it like a pharmacist. We study the medicinal properties of vitamins and the healing properties of vitamins. And we study deficiencies as diseases as nutritional deficiencies. So I had this in my head that there's something that we can do to heal the body, to control disease, or to maintain health that didn't have to do with prescription medicine, that didn't have to do with drugs. And I also, by this time, I was developing my spiritual senses, and I had some ideas about the power of the mind just from reading psychology and being kind of an amateur psychologist and a geek. So I started to think that maybe there were other things that were going on when we're sick that didn't have to do with the standard Western medical ways of treating disease. And so I started to experiment, and I was seeing patients, and I started to talk to patients, and I started to work on myself. And it dawned on me that when we're physically ill, it's not necessarily because we're physically ill. There's other dimensions to healing. Exactly. There's other dimensions to healing that were not being addressed. So the limitations of health refers to this idea that we're limited by our physical perspective, our purely physical perspective on the dis-ease process. And even the word says dis-ease. You're out of ease. You're out of ease. So the limitations of health refers to our narrow scope, our narrow vision of healing that doesn't serve us. And I found that my patients invariably, if they had cancer, or if they had an autoimmune problem, or if they had a skin disease, or if they had some kind of breakdown in the body, invariably there was something going on mentally and emotionally and ultimately spiritually. And when I say spiritually, I don't mean anything woo-woo, and I know you know this. I don't mean, you got to go to church, you got to go to synagogue, or you got to go to your mosque, or whatever it is. To me, spirituality is this idea that we are connected to all that is. When you were born, something very interesting happens when we're born. When we come out of the womb, we go from a state of wholeness, a state of oneness, a state of connection, to a state of separation. Immediately we come out of the womb and we see something outside of us. As soon as we come out of the womb, we see the world as us and them. We don't know it, we're not perceiving it, but because of our neurology, we see us here and we see the world there. And this is the idea of original sin. The word sin means separation. That's what it means, literally in Spanish. Sin means without, separate. You're separate, you don't have something. We're born into seeing the world outside of us. And what that does something very interesting. See, there's a lot of fears out there. There's fear of heights. There's fear of crowds. There's fear of peanut butter getting stuck on the roof of your mouth. Right? There's fear of public speaking. There's fear of death. There's all these fears, right? But there's really only one fear. And that is the fear of the unknown. Because if you knew what death was, or you knew what public speaking was, or you knew what peanut butter in the top of your mouth was, you wouldn't be afraid of it. We are afraid of what we don't know. To know is to be connected. In fact, in the Bible, it says sex is to know. Adam knew Eve. So to know is actually to integrate with something. To not know, the unknown, is to separate. So when we come out of the womb, immediately we see the world as separate from us. We see the world as a known commodity and an unknown commodity. And what that does is it spikes up fear, the survival response. So as soon as we come out of the womb, we go into this survival mode because we see the world as disconnected from us. We see the world as separate from us. That's original sin. And that sense of not being connected to the world, I believe, is the fundamental flaw, is the fundamental problem when we're out of ease, when we're in dis-ease. Exactly. So at the root of all illness, the way I look at the root of all illness is the sense that we're not connected to God or all that is, or whatever you want to call it. We're somehow
universal source, higher power,
whatever you want to call it. It's like
Pachamama.
It's like we're marooned. It's like we're outside of it. And then it works down mentally. Then you go into these mental ideas of how am I going to control things? How am I going to survive? How am I going to make it? And then you go into this emotional sense of disconcertment because you're separated from the world. And ultimately it shows up as a physical problem. So the limitations of health refers to the fact that when we see the world strictly from a physical perspective, when we don't see the emotional aspect of health and well-being, the mental aspect of health and well-being, and ultimately the spiritual aspect of health and well-being, that says we're all connected. Every time I breathe out, you breathe in. Quantum physics tells us it's entanglement on every level.
Absolutely.
Right? On every level, we're connected. Separation is an illusion, a pure illusion.
I once had a teacher tell me that he said, he was talking like a theologian, but he was basically saying that everything is connected. And I was like, well, how is it connected? And he said, well, you know, the Big Bang, right? Prior to the Big Bang, everything was one, and then it just expanded.
Yeah.
But everything's always been connected from the very beginning, from the very moment of the consciousness of the divine.
Yes.
It's all been connected.
We're still the Big Bang. We're the banging. We're still banging. We're the bang. You and I are the bang. We're all the thing. It's the most, when you just think about it rationally, it doesn't make sense. But the problem is when you don't see it that way, your body starts to secrete stress hormones.
Exactly.
You activate the sympathetic nervous system. You go into this reptilian mode of survival. And that is, to me, that is what is behind all illness and all dis-ease. The sense that we have to survive, that we're out of ease, this fear response. And learning how to deactivate the fear response. I'm sure you heard false evidence appearing real, right? If as soon as you can learn to deactivate the fear response, you'll immediately become, you'll get better. And if you want to, you know, I call it the sympathetic and the parasympathetic nervous system, but you could call it fear and love. You know, in the Course, have you ever heard of A Course in Miracles? Have you read A Course?
Of course, I love Course in Miracles.
Right. I love A Course in Miracles, right? So in A Course in Miracles, it says the two fundamental forces are fear and love, and one is real and one isn't. So to me, that's what Jesus and Satan are about. Jesus and the devil are about fear and love, about love and fear. And Jesus says you're either with me or against me. So in the body, you're either sympathetic or you're parasympathetic. You're either operating out of a sense of relaxation and rest and peace of mind and contentment, or you're operating out of a sense of survival and fear. And so dis-ease is in the sympathetic realm, and that's a bit simplistic because you need both. But simplistically speaking, generally speaking, disease is in the sympathetic realm, and health and wellness, wholeness, if you will, are in the parasympathetic realm. And there's nothing more important from a physical perspective than getting in the parasympathetic realm as much as possible. But from an emotional perspective, and mental perspective, because mental and emotional are kind of the same, two sides of the same coin, getting into the love perspective versus the fear perspective. And from a spiritual perspective, understanding that we are one, connected to, not in an airy-fairy way, in a quantum physics way.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
In a non-technical way, in an obvious way.
Right. You know, it's what's so fun about these conversations that I'm having with people like you is that 17 years ago, when I started doing this type of work,
you're weird.
I was a weirdo. Well, and I still kind of a weirdo, but people just didn't understand what I was talking about. They didn't get it. Like I talk about how similar to what you're saying, almost the same thing, that every wound has a physical side to it, a mental side to it, and a spiritual side to it, or a heart, whatever you want to call it, right? And these wounds, like I always give the example of losing weight, right? That somebody's trying to lose weight, and the habit in our American culture, the prescriptive source to do it is always diet and exercise. But if on that mental level, that person only perceives themselves as the fat kid that everybody beat up, and on that heart side, the way to serving a purpose of protecting them from abuse or protecting them from something that they're afraid of, the fears, right? Then that's 2 against 1. And the heart and the mind continue to perceive them as a fat person. So even if they are able to bypass that experience for a little while, like on Biggest Losers, old TV shows, they lose weight. Within a short amount of time, that weight is going to come right on back. And it's going to come back even bigger. They're going to be even bigger because it's needed, it's necessary to them in their survival.
That's, that reminds me of the word identity. Like what you identify as. Like when you identify as a fat person, you identify as a drug addict, you identify as a depressed person, you identify as a poor person. It's if you identify as things, the word identity means identical to. You're the same as.
I am that.
I am that. In fact, that's so cool because I always tell people, be very careful what word you put after I am. Right? Like I am depressed. I am sick. Oh, I hate that one. I am sick. No, do not say that. Cancel. Right away.
From a therapeutic point of view, it's a fine line because I to be able to have people sometimes, because they're in so much denial about things sometimes, right? Especially I work with addiction and stuff like that. There's so much denial. Oh, I'm not that, but they're engaging in it. They're living the lifestyle of it. They're in the experience of it.
Say, I feel that. Say, I feel
exactly,
sick, but not I am sick. I am healthy, but I feel sick. I am skinny, but I feel fat. I am rich, but I feel broke. That's different because then you're not identifying with it. Be very careful what you say you're identical to. Like many of our problems are just a case of mistaken identity in a lot of ways. And this is why people can't quit their addiction because they think they're cigarette smokers.
They are that.
They are that. They think they're a cigarette smoker, identify as a cigarette smoker. But if you don't want to, if you identify, say, you know what, I'm not a cigarette smoker. It's going to be much harder for you to smoke a cigarette. Or you say, I'm not an alcoholic, but it's going to be much harder if you drink because it's going to be a violation of your core identity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's no space between the addiction and the person, right? There's no space. They think that they are that, they are the same. And when therapeutically, part of the work I do is to create some space so they can start seeing that, oh, wait a minute, that's something I do. It's not who I am.
Exactly.
Right? Giving that space to allow them to be able to notice that the habits that they're in, the behavioral experiences that they're in, don't define who they are. When I'm interviewing clients for the first time, I will often we'll do our first session, and almost always I take somebody on, but there have been times where I said, I'm sorry, I can't work with you. Because I need to be able to see in my clients who they are underneath what they're presenting, underneath the anxiety, the addiction, the trauma, the pain, whatever it is, that who they are underneath all of that is that their truth with a capital T, their truth is that they are whole, perfect, and complete. And my job as a therapist is to wipe off all of the shit, wipe off all the stuff, the behaviors, the habits, the patterns, the thinking, so that they can see that truth. They can be revealed again, right? The light can shine through again. Every now and then, very rarely, but every now and then, somebody convinces me that they are that pain, or they are that suffering, or they are that addiction. And I have to say, you know what, I'm sorry, I can't work with you because you convinced me. I can no longer see your perfection, your perfect health. You have absolutely hijacked my experience of you and put you in that experience. You are so married to being that, to that identity, that I can't see beyond it. It happens very rarely. But as a therapist, I have to see that. Go ahead.
People are vested, like they have an attachment. They don't want to let go of it. Kind of like
it's identity.
It's identity.
It's identity. When I remember one of the early on as I was healing myself, I was slammed in the back of a semi truck and I was told I could never walk again. And I died. I went to the other side. I came back. I had what I call my cascade of pain, where fibromyalgia and arthritis and asthma and chronic pain and influenza type system, like feelings all the time, every day, right? And bronchitis and my hemoglobin splitting, shutting down my organs, my white blood cells attacking my red blood cells, depression, anxiety, all of these things, right? When I started to come out of that experience, and it's such an interesting thing that on the third day, I actually realized on that third day that I felt better, that I felt good. And I kind of looked back and went, oh my gosh, I haven't had any pain for 3 days. I didn't even truly realize it until that moment. And the first thought that popped into my head, the first thought after that conscious awareness of, oh, I feel good. The first thought was, well, you better get sick again.
What?
That,
Why did you,
that
because of
was
your
how I
identity?
knew how to be.
Oh,
I
God.
spent a decade or more in chronic pain that was nurtured by friends, family members, doctors, all
Uh,
that type of stuff, right? It became my identity. I lost my identity when I was slammed into that back of that semi truck.
wow.
My identity was taken away from me, how I knew how to exist in the world, kind of like my football players when they come in. But instead of having a football player body, I had a dancer body. I was discovered as a dancer. I started dancing, and within a year, I was a teacher's assistant, right? So it was my natural body's ability. And it's how I perceive life. I didn't do physical education, PE, in high school for the last 2 years of high school because I was in dance class 5, 6 hours a day, right?
Wow. Were
I
you
was
a
doing
professional?
these things.
You,
Pardon?
you were a professional dancer?
I never got to that point. I was apprenticed and I was at that point, and then I was slammed into the back of a semi
Oh,
truck. Somebody actually came along and pushed my bike into the back of a semi-parked semi truck. So I shattered my left leg. I cracked vertebrae, split wrist open. I had
my
undiagnosed
God.
brain
Oh
damage.
my God.
I had all these things that happened. Now, my identity had just been lost. Who was I? I had discovered myself of who I was, my natural abilities, my talents, how I knew how to exist in the world. In a way, I had found my voice in being this person, being a dancer, being this expressive artist. I had discovered who I was, and then suddenly that was taken away in a second. And so I spent years trying to say, who am I? Who am I now? Am I this disease? Am I this pain? Am I this pain? Or am I this new one today? Who am I in these experiences? And I became identified by them to the point that I didn't even realize how identified I was, right?
Wow.
I had been taken over by that pain. And
Did
it had
your
been so long that I didn't know how to perceive myself differently.
did your NLP and your hypnosis and all the stuff you do now that came after?
Yes, that was part of my healing process. So I was slammed into the back of the semi truck. I, this was many years ago. And at that time, the doctors didn't have a clue what to do with me. They were wonderful. They flew in 14 surgeons from the NFL to
Oh
put
my
my knee back together, right? Cutting edge, amazing
year.
surgery.
What year? What year
Oh
were you?
gosh, I was just a kid. So this was 1984,
Oh my
the
God.
end of 84.
Wow.
And, there weren't chiropractors on every corner like there are now. There weren't acupuncturists, herbalists on every
Right.
corner like there are now. There weren't nutritionists on every corner
Yeah.
like there are right
Yeah.
now,
1984 is a
right?
long time ago, huh?
It was absolutely. And I was just struggling. I mean, I didn't know where to go, what to do. People like me I didn't come in contact at least with people like me. And people would just say, hey, I went and tried this guy out or this woman guy had a session with her and I felt great. I'd be like, great, sign me up. And I used every paycheck I had basically
Wow.
to, pay my basic bills, and anything extra went to healing. And over the years, I stumbled into my healing and I learned things and I started healing my body, healing my mind, and healing my broken heart. And
Did you
I
have a
started
broken heart
calling
too?
it.
Did you have a broken heart? Did you go into your injury with a broken heart?
So, not necessarily. I went into my injury, and I loved what you said earlier about that. I went into my injury angry. I
Uh,
didn't have a broken heart,
uh-huh.
but when I had my injury, I was a kid. I felt like I didn't belong anywhere. The only place I felt home, that experience of being home, was in the dance studio.
Yeah.
Like guys talk about being on the basketball court or whatever it is, right? That was where I felt accepted and I felt safe and I felt home.
Wow.
And I lost that. I was pissed. My anger was just beyond.
How long were you pissed for? How long?
Pardon me?
How long were you pissed off for after your injury?
Oh God, decades.
How did you stop? What happened? Was it one thing that got you out of it, or was it gradual?
It was a gradual thing. I had to learn to love myself, accept myself. I had to learn to take charge of those abusive thoughts that were constantly happening in my head. We all have these what crazy roommates or whatever you want to call it. Some people call them chorus members, that type of thing.
The
That are,
Untethered Soul. Did you read The Untethered Soul? Did you ever read
I just did recently. I
Yeah.
just literally picked up that
That's a
Michael
great-
Singer.
Oh, that's a great book. I have
Fantastic book.
Fantastic book. Yeah, he talks about roommates, crazy roommates.
Right. Yeah, I had just gotten that. So, this is years of my going through, stumbling into my healing. I eventually started to combine practices. And that was a huge thing for me, where I finally started to understand that the old sort of allopathic way of looking at things from this sort of mechanistic point of view of drugs and surgery, that stopped working for me. I was so grateful when it did, but then it stopped. And I had to look at that wounded heart. I had to go into my shadow. I had to go into my obsessed mind that was just so focused on the pain.
Didn't that make you a better healer? Didn't that make you a better, better with other people?
It created my calling. So I developed my life purpose out of my pain. I like to call it the gold in the garbage, right? The garbage was your life of trauma, right? What you had to deal with, right? Beautiful. And the gold is that you're Ben Fuchs.
Beautiful. That's beautiful. That's so beautiful, Peter. Thank you.
Well, we have similar experiences, done differently, but we have these different experiences.
I wonder if a lot of us who've dedicated our lives to helping people and making the world a better place come from that.
Exactly.
Come from that wounded place, that hurt place.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't get to the gold. They don't get to the other side.
It's great. I think it's grace. I don't know why. Why do you think? I don't know why I got to that place, but I did. And I know my daughter is like the beneficiary of my crappy childhood because I learned how you never treat a child.
Right.
I learned how and now I have a granddaughter, and now it's like 2 generations down. And I think that's what has to happen is we have to kind of say the buck stops here. Those of us who had that kind of abusive childhood, we have to say the buck stops here. And that will change the world, because I think the world we have the curse of the generations where, you know what I'm saying? It's like parents give it to their kids, give it to their kids, give it to their kids, give it to their kids. Absolutely. But I like what you said about how, in 1984, which it doesn't sound like that was long ago, but it was a really long time ago. There weren't.
It was a long time ago, man.
But look how it's changed. Look how the world has changed in the last 20 years. Mm-hmm. But you got yoga classes everywhere. You've got online yoga classes and mindfulness and meditation classes and spirituality and aliens. You hear about all the stuff with aliens now. They're
right.
Have you been reading about all this stuff? How like the government's saying, oh yeah, we've been in contact with aliens. I mean, the world has changed so dramatically in the last 20 years. And some could say maybe not in a good way, and maybe not, things aren't happening in a good way, but in another way, we're becoming more aware of our psyches. More aware of the power of our psyches.
Something I always lean into is that spiritual concept of divine right action, that I might know, not be aware. I may not be able to see how the goodness of the universe, of spirit, God, whatever you want to call it, is revealing itself, because I'm just a small part of the massive whole. So I may not be able to see it. I may not have that perspective, but I have faith in divine right action, and that where we are going and flowing exactly to where we need to be.
I 100% believe that. I have 100% faith. And as above, so below. So if it's happening in your life, if you can see in your life how there's gold in the garbage, as you say, then in as above, so below style, then that's happening in the world the same way. And there's kind of, I feel like we're in a birth canal. It's
we're being squeezed.
We're being squeezed. Exactly. It's like in you ever watch Star Trek? I'm sure you watch Star Trek.
I love Star Trek.
Right. I know. So I figured you did. So when they go from warp speed 1 to warp speed 2, there's like a shaking. Right. And that always happens when there's a change that's being made. There's always like this turmoil. There's always the shaking. And I really feel like we're being born into, and I don't know, maybe it'll be 100 years, maybe it'll be 10 generations or something before we begin to see us all as connected. We begin to love our neighbor as ourselves. And to me, that means when we say love our neighbor as ourselves, it means love our neighbor because he is ourself.
Absolutely. Like he's a reflection of who I am.
Exactly. It's all a big dream. And just like in a dream, when everything's you, right? In the dream, it's all you. It's the same thing. It's all us. And so when we finally get that concept that to hurt another person, you might as well just take a hammer and hit your head with it, because you're hurting yourself when you hurt another person. It's like, if I hate somebody, whose cortisol is going up?
Right?
Right.
Put the poison down.
Yeah. Right. So that's ultimately the lesson, is you can't hate somebody else without making your chemistry screwed up. And you can't love, when you love somebody else, you're the one that gets the oxytocin. And you're the one that gets all the good hormones and the serotonin and the dopamine,
Absolutely.
right? So that's
Absolutely.
Ultimately we'll see the world that way.
Well, and you're talking about a forgiveness practice, Ben. So that's a whole other topic, and I love what you're saying. And we don't have time; it's time to go. So, Ben, you're amazing.
Fun.
Thank you so much for sharing your joy with us. What was that?
I said that was a lot of fun. Thank you.
You're awesome. Tell us how we can connect with you, or all of the listeners, how they can find you.
Yeah, so I have my main business is skincare. I do skincare, and I've been doing skincare for many, many years. And so my skincare products you can find at truthtreatments.com. My radio program is called The Bright Side, and you can get it through my blog, pharmacistben.com. And then if you just Google Pharmacist Ben and anything, Pharmacist Ben Skin, Pharmacist Ben and Cancer, Pharmacist Ben and whatever, you'll get all kinds of videos that I've done and interviews in my blog and articles I've written, etc. So Pharmacist Ben, truthtreatments.com, and pharmacistben.com.
Well, Ben, I so enjoy talking to you. Thank you for sharing your joy. Thank you for sharing your light, your passion with us.
Yes, I love your energy, Peter. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Well, as we sign off, this is just a reminder that this program is brought to you in conjunction with Earthwalk, the global wholeness clock, and its daily moments offer a variety of opportunities such as global community access to live interviews, health and wellness classes, meditations, music, art, conscious connection, relationship building. You can find out more about the wholeness clock at earthwalkunited.org/wholeness clock. Thank you to everybody who has tuned in. Thank you for being part of my audience. Thank you for being part of this beautiful healing experience. Dr. Ben is here. If you have any questions, you can find him. We'll be posting his contact information as we post the videos. And I love you guys. Make it a great day, and namaste. Ciao.
Thank you so much, Peter. Have a great day.